Hello and welcome to Bandwidth Conversations, a podcast that finds out about the stories and journeys of artists, performers and rock stars of life. I am Katie Brewer, and my guest today is one of the most prolific composers, arrangers and conductors in history. He has composed the music for over 50 films. He has composed, arranged, conducted, produced, directed countless music for television. On one particular evening, he found that his music was being played simultaneously on all the 4 TV channels that then existed. He has written, arranged, and produced the music for over 4,000 commercials worldwide. As an arranger and conductor, he's worked on hit records for artists including Rod Stewart, Diana Ross, Tina Turner, Roy Orbison, Simple Minds, George Michael, The Damned. He's an incredible saxophonist. In fact, plays not only the sax, but also clarinet, flute and piano, and has played or recorded with the likes of Little Richard, Prince, David Bowie, Eric Clapton, Sting, Jimi Hendrix, Chet Baker, Bob Marley, Amy Winehouse. The list is endless. Hot Chocolate and Van Morrison are 2 of the many bands he has toured with. Hans Zimmer said, without exaggeration, it can be assumed that half the music of the 20th century wouldn't exist without John's contribution. The other half is rubbish. Danny Clifford, rock and roll photographer and guest on this show, said, John is one of the most well-connected people I have ever met. He is well-connected because of the respect and pure love that everyone has for him globally. He really is a phenomenon and yet has been quietly doing what he does for decades without blowing his own trumpet, or sax in his case. Sir Michael Palin said, I rung all the police stations in London, but no one has a bad word to say about him. Terry Gilliam named him the Hidden Man, and this is the title of his memoir, just out, and a fantastic read. I'm thrilled to be talking today to the Hidden Man, who is John Altman. John, thank you so much for being here today.
It's my pleasure. I got back in time eventually.
You did, by the skin of your teeth, and despite a tube strike. Well, John, your family were incredibly musical. When I started reading your book, I thought, oh my goodness, there's a Netflix series or several podcasts just about them. Your uncles Wolf and Sid Phillips had glittering musical careers. And I think I understand that Uncle Sid turned down Frank Sinatra at one stage.
He did indeed. He was a great arranger as well as being a great clarinet player. And initially he'd had lessons from Puccini, who was a fan of his. But in later years, he went to America in 1937 and he wrote for the Paul Whiteman Band and the Dorsey Brothers. And he auditioned singers for appearances. And one of them, as you say, was Frank Sinatra, who he said, come back when you've had a bit more experience. The upshot is 13 years later, Sinatra came to the Palladium where Wolf Phillips was the conductor. And he said, is your brother playing anywhere? And Wolf said, yeah, he's at the Café de Paris or Le Suivi or wherever he was then. So let's go and see him. So, of course, it caused a huge kerfuffle when Sinatra walks in. And he walks straight up to the bandstand to Sid and says, have I got enough experience for you? And Sid didn't have a clue what he was talking about. He had to remind him that he turned him down.
Oh, he didn't even remember he'd turned him down.
No, he didn't remember it at all.
It's hilarious. Well, your father was he was a desert rat in World War II and then devoting his life to public service. So you had all this going on in your family. Could you describe a typical day in the life of the Phillips Altman family? What could happen in a day?
Anything could happen because Wolf would bring people like Danny Kaye and Jack Benny and Sophie Tucker and Nat King Cole round to the flat. And, you know, he and Danny Kaye would play records till 4 a.m, and the neighbour would knock and complain. And my mother would say, oh, I'm really sorry. Wolf was here with Danny Kaye. And the neighbour would say, Danny Kaye? And you didn't tell us? And then Jack Benny would come round and he used to put black boot polish on his bald patch and it would rub off on the antimacassars and you couldn't wash it out. So my mother was, Jack Benny's coming round, hide the antimacassars. And to be honest with you, at the age of 3, 4, I didn't know who these people were. They were meaningless to me, and then suddenly I started seeing them on records, or I'd go to the cinema and there would be Danny Kaye on the big screen. I go, oh, that's our friend. And of course, my mother didn't help, inverted commas, because she would tell me stories about palling around with Fats Waller and Coleman Hawkins and Connie Boswell and making Vera Lynn breakfast at 4 a.m. when they came back off the road. So show business was sort of imbued into me really before I knew anything of real life.
When you sort of look back now, do you think that your musical talent was genetics, or do you think it was unconsciously just sort of absorbing all this great musical stuff that was around you, like toddlers absorb languages sort of by osmosis almost?
I think it was a mixture of both, because not only did I love music, but when I started playing piano, I was composing, I could write things down, I could read music, and subsequently I gave up piano lessons at 11. And I'm totally self-taught from then on. I haven't even got music O-level. So somehow I knew how to write for orchestras. I knew how they laid themselves out. I knew how to play the saxophone. I taught myself how to do that. So really, even conducting, I taught myself out of necessity, because I'm doing a film and the budget might not be there to hire a conductor. So I'm out there conducting. And they're following me, so I'm obviously doing something right, or they just stop playing and put their instruments down and say, we haven't a clue what you're up to. So somehow I got away with it and found myself being hired to conduct the Royal Philharmonic or the Halle Orchestra or the Birmingham Symphony or the Ulster. I couldn't believe it. No training whatsoever, just instinct.
And teaching yourself and teaching also with the clarinet and picking up the flute and just all of that was just you playing around with it.
Absolutely. Well, in the same way, I got a trumpet and I worked out what sat on the trumpet, and I know my way around. I can't play the violin, but I know my way around it. So when I started composing and arranging, I wouldn't write stuff that a trombone player would come in and say, do you know what, this is impossible to play. I can't play this. And a lot of people starting out will find that they're writing things that are unplayable because they don't know the instruments. And I somehow knew where everything sat. And it's got to be a gift. It has to be, And the thing about gifts is you use them or you abuse them. It's very simple.
And you used yours.
I used mine, yeah. I mean, I probably abused it for many years because it was... I hate to say it was easy because it makes me sound like some sort of savant or whatever, but I always knew what you had to do. Even when I wasn't doing it, I could analyze stuff. And one of my earliest writing jobs was doing takedowns for the BBC. And the takedowns were very common then because American artists would come over to do, say, the Two Ronnies or Top of the Pops or Parkinson, and they wouldn't bring music. They probably wouldn't have any. So they would get off the plane and I would get a cassette and I'd take down what I heard on the tape and then adapt it for the orchestra in question. So if it was the Two Ronnies, you might say, well, they've got woodwind and not strings. It's just an example. They did have strings. But so I would write a woodwind part and transcribe what was being played on the strings onto the woodwind. So it was a great training ground. And also stylistically, I got to jump from Don Williams country music to Telly Savalas to someone like the Stylistics, in fact. And I was writing these charts and I became one of the go-to arrangers for that sort of thing.
Is taking down something, is that the same as scoring?
Taking down is really being a musical secretary in the sense that the arrangement already exists because it's on the record. So the funny thing about arrangements is people don't quite understand them. If you said, sing me Tears of a Clown, you would probably go, da, 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 da. That's the arrangement. That's not the song. If you sing Sweet Caroline, you go, Sweet Caroline, ba, ba, ba. That's the arrangement. That's not the song. If you sing I Will Survive, there's that string passage in the middle. Arrangement. It doesn't exist before the song.
So the song is the melody, and then everything else that comes with it and beefs it up and puts the pizzazz into it is the arrangement.
Exactly. Scoring technically is really just writing it out. But there are three things as well. Obviously there's composition, there's orchestration, which is really being a musical secretary in the sense that the composer will write down exactly what he wants. So John Williams will do a complete sketch and the orchestrator will just fill it out for the orchestra. So there's not really any creativity involved. It's all been done by the composer. An arranger, however, is putting everything in on the basic song. And that was what I did mainly.
If we go back to your schooling, because not only you have this amazing musical talent, you're also very bright student because you win a scholarship to the City of London School. And during all of that time, you are playing in a bunch of bands, and many of those musicians, like you, went on to do great things. And in your sort of fog of youth, were you aware that you were all quite special?
The thing is, when you hear about people forming bands, you quite often hear, oh, I had a band when I was at school. They were dreadful and we soon stopped. I went from band to band and they were the best. So inevitably, people became lawyers or photographers or scientists, but people also went on to form other bands. So, for example, Kim Rue, who's in the band with me, wrote Walking on Sunshine. Chaz Jankel wrote Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick, and I Know Corrida. Rick Parnell, who we lost the other day, was the drummer in Spinal Tap.
Oh my gosh, it's one of my favourite movies.
Yeah, he's brilliant in it. Pete Van Hook, who was our drummer, wound up in Mike and the Mechanics and Van Morrison and now manages Paul Carrick. So everybody, and then my circle of people who I occasionally played with included Paul Kossoff, who formed Free. Chris Squire went on to form Yes. It really was, Northwest London was this breeding ground for bands, and I was in the middle of it. So when I left school, I went to university, I kept playing. And that was interesting because that was the time when I made my first record. I hooked up with people like Nick Drake and Peter Green and John Martin and Bridget St. John and Andy Fernbach, and then I had Muddy Waters at my 21st.
Yeah.
And this is all while I'm at university. So it was a very funny double life. And my friend was social secretary, so I got him to book all my mates so I could get up and play. So they must have been sick of me by the end of university. Oh God, he's up there again.
No, I think it's fantastic. What a cool person to have as a friend at university.
Oh, it was. And my flatmate then became one of the top music business managers and agents. And he actually managed me for a while when I was in Hollywood. And his other clients were Richard Pryor and Barry White. And then he discovered Lady Gaga, and he's still there as a big force. And he says it's all my fault. I don't agree. I think he was a bit talented, but...
Well, when you were at university, because you were actually reading English and American studies as well as doing all of this music. So music was still your fun element. This wasn't where you were thinking you were necessarily going to go professionally.
No.
But then you were in London and you were playing at the Roundhouse, the Marquee, Hundreds Club, Speakeasy, and you're playing with all these incredible musicians. Can you just sort of describe the scene and sort of take us there?
Well, the important thing to remember, which people don't believe, but it's absolutely true, is you would go to the room above a pub or at the back of a pub and you would see Cream, Jimi Hendrix, Led Zeppelin, Fleetwood Mac, and they would literally there would be no bouncers. There probably wouldn't be a dressing room. So I would go in with a saxophone and I'd go up to the band and say, can I play? And they'd say, yeah, sure. And what they would always do is give you one song, and if you were terrible, they'd throw you off. And if they liked you, they'd keep you on for the whole show. And then after the show, they would say, oh, we're playing at the so-and-so on Sunday. Why don't you come down and join us? Or my friend's in this band. Why don't you go and see them and tell them I sent you? So somehow I built up this circle of acquaintance. The important thing to remember for me was I was on a full grant, which of course you don't have now. But what it meant was I didn't have to earn a living from playing music. So I could really turn up anywhere, jam, and not be committed to going on the road with, my friends went on tour with Sam and Dave or Arthur Conley or Otis Redding or whoever it might be. But I didn't need to do that. So I would be in London or Brighton and I'd just get up and play with whoever asked me to play. And that's how I got into the scene. And it was a thriving scene as well.
And then you were in the orbit of a lot of musicians as well who were on self-destruct. People like Tim Hardin, Harry Nilsson, Nick Drake. How did you avoid going down that route?
Oh, that's a tricky question, isn't it? It never appealed to me. It's very simple. I like to be in control, and I like to get, inverted commas, high by playing music. And that was enough. I would do a gig and I'd be walking on air, for example, and somebody would say, take this and you'll feel good. I would not say out loud, but I'd say, I already feel good. Why do I need to take something that I don't know what it is? And I heard so many horror stories about people taking bad trips, and I saw them, or people buying bad drugs that were laced with strychnine or arsenic.
Oh, gosh.
And I just, it didn't appeal ever, and still doesn't. So I avoided it, and I literally would go to somewhere where there was music and just be for the music, either listening or playing, or both if I was lucky.
Well, then you move on and you do a PhD at Birkbeck College and specializing in, I'm going to see if I can get this right, concepts of time and chronology in mid-Victorian novels. I'm not even going to attempt to ask you any questions on that. But
sounds thrilling, doesn't it?
Oh my God. But you're also doing some supply teaching. So I don't know how you're having the time for all of this. Now, was that when you came across Danny Clifford?
Absolutely.
Oh, was it? Because he said to me, well, I said all these glowing things about you. And he said, I still can't figure out if John was a good or a bad teacher. He said, because when he taught me, all we did was talk about music.
While I was teaching there, I got a phone call from, I say it was Chris Mercer, who was the sax player with John Mayall. And he said, I've been offered a gig with this band, Hot Chocolate. I don't want to do it. I don't fancy it. Do you want to go? And I thought, yeah, they're top of the charts. Why not? So I phoned up, I think it might have been Harvey or Errol. And I said, I'm coming, I'm bringing a horn section. And they said, well, we'll send you the tracks, but we don't have any music. And I said, that's all right. I'll write it down from the record. And I did. I went in with a pile of music. And then they said, we've got the music all the time. We were testing you.
Oh.
Because we had another horn section come in and they moaned that there was no music and said, we can't possibly play without any music. But I'd written it all out. So I passed that test and we all hit it off personality-wise. And I joined them as a sort of an auxiliary road member, which is wonderful.
You were with them for 2 years, weren't you?
2 years,
long time.
Yeah. And I wound up rewriting all their arrangements because basically they wanted to be like Kool and the Gang or the Ohio Players. And their arranger was a very jazzy arranger. So they were very busy horn charts. And they wanted simple, funky, James Brown type riffs. So I just rewrote it. And hey presto, I was an arranger. Amazing.
Was that the first sort of proper arranging that you had done by then?
Pretty much, yeah. I did a record with Murray Head that got in the charts, which was a Dixieland version of Someone's Rocking My Dreamboat on Say It Ain't So, which is a great album. But between the Hot Chocolate thing and starting to write for the group The Sandpipers, who did Guantanamera, that got me in as an arranger. And that was a hit as well. We did a disco version of Hang On Sloopy.
Oh my gosh, yes, of course.
It went to number 28 in the charts, and suddenly I was an arranger. And then all the stuff came in I'd already recorded, but I'd already recorded as a sax player with Monty Python on their album Matching Tie and Handkerchief. And because I was also now arranging, I became part of their inner circle. So I did Life of Brian, I did the Ruttles. So it was all happening at once,
How did you come across Monty Python, or how did they come across you?
Well, I had a very good friend called Ollie Halsall, who was possibly one of the greatest guitarists we've ever produced. Not many people know about him. But he had joined a band called Tempest with John Heisman, and they were playing at the Marquee. So I drove down to the Marquee, and they were playing, and it was great. And I was at the bar with Neil Innes and John Gorman and Mike McCartney. And we were chatting away, and Ollie came over to join us. And Ollie said, we're recording tomorrow with Monty Python, and they need a sax. Do you fancy doing it? I said, do I? Yeah, of course. Absolutely. So I went down there and I got on with all of them. And they didn't need a sax, but I wound up singing and doing some hand claps. And we hit it off. So I became part of their circle.
And Life of Brian, always look on the bright side of life. How did that come about?
Well, they didn't. I was in script meetings, which is extraordinary to think of now. But they didn't have an ending for the film, and they were saying, "Oh, he'll escape. Oh, the Suicide Squad will kill him." Nothing concrete. And Eric Idle thought, "I think write a song. We could do a song." So he basically guitar and voice and sent it to me. Played it to them, and they were, "It's not that good, is it? Oh, it's nothing." But he called me and said, "Look, let's do it, see what happens." So I phoned Terry Jones and said, "How much do you need?" And he said, "About 20 seconds. And I rang Eric, and he unprintable response. But he said, "Let's do the whole song." So we went into Chapel Studios and we did the whole song. And I wrote the arrangement, and I thought it should be a Hollywood musical type thing. And I'm one of the whistlers on the...
Did you think of the whistling? Because the whistling's just brilliant in it.
No, I think Eric thought of it. I mean, there's a thing that Neil thinks he thought of it as well. It's one of those Rashomon things where everybody's got a different picture. I didn't think of the whistling, but I was certainly the most prominent one on the soundtrack. And again, I can hear myself above everyone else. And it's still a great sequence. I mean, whatever you say, it's hilarious.
Oh, it's absolutely wonderful, and what a great song. I mean, you cannot fail to be in a good mood when you've heard that song.
No, that's absolutely right. I wish I'd known at the time. I went off and did another session in the afternoon. No idea what.
Wow. And then after that, or because of that, you then are part of the Ruttles, and I was able to see some footage of that, which was absolutely hilarious. And great songs, great lyrics.
Great songs and great film.
And the Ennis Book of Records.
Yep.
Was that all happening at the same time?
Well, it was all happening at the same time, but exactly the same time, I was musical director for Van Morrison and touring with him. So how did I fit all these things in? I don't know.
Well, how did you meet Van Morrison? How did you connect with him?
Pete Van Hook and Jerome Rimson and Pete Wingfield, who are all great mates of mine, were in Montreux backing, I think it might have been Eddie Cleanhead Vincent. It was somebody at the Montreux Jazz Festival. And Van needed a band. He showed up with no band. So he co-opted them into his band and they all hit it off. So Pete rang me and said, "Oh, I got Van Morrison. He's coming to stay with me from Switzerland. Why don't you come over?" So I went over to his place and Van's there and I'm there and we started jamming and we're talking and go out for a burger, hang out, watch telly, and we became sort of pals. And then from that, he'd just broken up the Caledonia Soul Orchestra and I think he was in dispute with his record label as well. So he wasn't that interested in doing anything. And then when he next formed a band, he said, "Oh, come and play." So we did a TV show with a very unusual lineup, which was Dr. John on keyboards, Mick Ronson on guitar, Mo Foster and Pete Van Hook. And then we had a big jam session with Brian Auger and Roger Chapman of Family and Bobby Tench and Herbie Armstrong. And he thought, "Oh, do you know what? I'd like to have a big band like that." So a couple of years later, we put together a band and we went on tour and we did 2 tours, the Wavelengths tour and Into the Music. And then at the end of the music tour, I was just getting so much work. I just said, "Right, I'm done. I can't do this anymore."
It takes so much energy as well because you really can't be doing anything else and you're on the road all the time. And to someone like me, I think touring sounds so exciting, but it's probably quite tiring, actually.
It's tiring and there's an awful lot of hanging about, and you can't remember what country you're in and your room was that way yesterday, but it's that way today. And in those days, of course, there was no European currency. So guys in the band had handfuls of kroner and lira and Deutschmarks. And of course, the thing was that you would see something in Norway that cost 7 kroner and go, "Oh, that's cheap, buy it," and find out it was like £100. And then you'd turn something down that was 10,000 francs, which was about 20p. It was very difficult to get your head around what was going on. By the end of it, I just had enough. The thrill of actually playing is such a minuscule part of, like, if you're in, let's say you're in Oslo, you play for maybe 45 minutes, but you've got a day flying in, a day hanging around, the night hanging around, the night after hanging around, the next morning leaving early, and it just cumulatively adds up. And if you haven't got a taste for it, I had the added pressure of, well, you've got these arrangements to write and you're writing commercials and you could be doing some records. So that's what I did.
You've worked on records, film, television, theatre, commercials, live performances. So let's start with your hit records that you've been involved in so many. So I'm just going to pick a couple. Ala Jones, Walking Through the Air. Alison Moyet, That Old Devil Called Love. Can you tell us about that recording day and how it got to be number one?
Well, it was done as I hate to say vanity project, because Alison's parents, it was their favourite song. So she sort of tacked it on. It was nothing to do with what she'd done before at all. She'd done all that stuff with Yazoo and Alf, the album, and she said, I want to sing that song. It's a Billie Holiday song. So we put together a band of jazz musicians and we went into this studio I'd never been to before or since. I can't even remember where it was. And in the middle of the room was a grand piano, the make of which I'd never seen before or since. And the tuner did his bit and he went out and he left. And Mick Pine, I'd hired to play piano, sat down at the piano, played one chord, and it was horrendously out of tune. I mean, it was just unplayably out of tune. And in those days, no mobile phones, so you couldn't ring the tuner and say, come back, it's all gone wrong. So we're standing around thinking, what on earth do we do? Alison Moyet suddenly says, I trained as a piano tuner, I'll fix it. And she produced a bag of tuning equipment.
Oh my gosh, you had it with her.
Yeah, climbed inside the piano, tuned it, and it was perfect. And I actually said, I can't see Madonna doing that. Anyway, the record, CBS decided to release it as a single. And within a week, it was top of the charts.
It's a beautiful song.
None of us expected it, least of all Mick Pine, who had been booked on a session and it just said Alison Moyet. If it said the title of the song, I think it probably did at the top of the music. But all he was playing was what I'd written out for him. So he didn't know the tune. She hadn't sung her bit yet. And he just played backing, great. So 6 months later, it's top of the charts. And he's playing a gig at Kettner's restaurant, solo piano. And Peter Boiseau, who owned Kettner's, comes in, claps his hands, shuts everybody up in the dining room, and says, ladies and gentlemen, our pianist Mick Pine is top of the pops. And he will now play his version of That Old Devil Called Love. And Mick didn't have a clue what he was talking about, It's like... So I said to him, what do you do? He said, well, I ran my hand up and down the piano. So I did get some funny looks.
Let's talk about George Michael, because you also arranged Kissing a Fool in part of the Faith album. How had he heard about you?
Well, when his father owned a restaurant next door to where we rehearsed, in the pub next door, which Pete's dad owned. And he told me that he sat on the steps listening to us practicing. So he said, I know who you are. And he reeled off the names of all the people in the band. And we used to go into the restaurant. I used to go there to eat. And I never noticed a 5-year-old kid running around. Who does? But he told me that in the middle of the session. But initially he rang me up, and very flattering. He'd heard That Old Devil Called Love. And he said to me, I've got a song. You're the only person who can do this with me. And I thought, wow, that's really nice. Then he wanted to record it at the studio in Denmark, where he did the rest of Faith, which you could only get to by boat after you've flown it. And I said, look, the guys I'm booking, they're not going to want to get in a boat and stay for a week. There's no way. They're not rock and rollers. They're all aging jazzers, start complaining as soon as they get on the plane. So we went to Island Studios in Basing Street. It was great fun, and I decided to play on it as well, which I never do on records.
Oh, you played on that one as well?
I'm playing sax on it, yeah.
Oh my gosh, okay. Wow.
It's very strange why I did. I mean, the logics of people. But on the Alison Moyet record, I had a very fine sax player, and her management said to me, she's doing a gala at the Palladium and an old grey whistle test, but there's no money. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll do it, because I'd be embarrassed to ask the guy on the record to play for free. I just find that embarrassing. So I did it. And then I got a phone call from the sax player saying, how dare you not call me? I would have done, but I said, but I thought it was insulting, so I don't mind playing for free, but I'm not going to ask you to do it. So anyway, when it came to the George Michael record, I thought, I'm not going to have that problem. I'm just going to play. So I did. I'm glad I did, because it's become a classic. I just got a diamond disc for 10 million sales in America.
Wow, 10
alone.
million.
10 million.
You collaborate with Trevor Horn, you'll work with Simple Minds, Rod Stewart, you do the arrangement for Downtown Train. And then you have a surprise because then you hear it and it's in a totally different key, which I think that's hilarious that they just then
That was bizarre. Yeah, they just upped the key, kept the arrangement. Just
sounds great.
It does. It makes the record because all the vibratos are wrong because they're sped up. So, and I wouldn't have written the same arrangement in that key as I did in the other key. So everyone is playing at the top of their range as well. And it's really eerie and sort of, this is a good range. So it worked out well.
It worked out very well. Tina Turner and Barry White, In Your Wildest Dreams. Diana Ross, her Christmas album. The Damned, Eloise. I've been listening to all this music and I've been having such a brilliant time. I haven't listened to that in years, and that is just a top tune. Roy Orbison, Help, and then Bjork's Oh So Quiet. And can you tell us about that day?
Well, it's a very nice story. Recording sessions are in blocks of 3 hours. And I got asked if I'd do It's Oh So Quiet for her by my booker, or a manager that had called my booker and said, who's good with big band music? And she recommended me. So I got the gig. I didn't meet Bjork. I wrote the arrangement from a tape. There was an old Betty Hutton version that part of it I took down, then part of it I just, spruced up to make it modern. And we go in at 10 in the morning and we rehearse it and we iron out kinks and it's all together. And it's like 20 past 10 and she's not there. So I went into Nellie Hooper, who was producing, and said, any sign? And he said, oh, don't worry, she's just looking for her shoes. As soon as she's got them, she'll be here. Okay, fine. So it's quite a hard blow. So I gave everyone a break and said, come back in 20 minutes and we'll be doing it. So they came back in 20 minutes and she's not there. And I ran it again and she's not there. And I said, well, I'm not going to knock you out, but just have a rest and she'll be here in a minute. So 11 o'clock goes by, 11:30, 12 o'clock, 12:30, 1:45. There's now 15 minutes left and I've given up. I just think, right, everybody has to leave because they've got other work. I just thought, well, it's not going to happen. They're just going to have to pay everyone. Forget it. Don't worry about it. 10-1, the door opens and she comes in. And, hello, how are we? What's going on? And I said, well, what's going on is we're losing everyone in 10 minutes. And she said, oh, I thought they were here all day. And I said, no, they're not. They're session musicians. They come in, they do it, they go. And she said, oh, right. Oh, well, I guess we better do it then. And she goes in the booth, puts on the headphones. The rhythm section can hear her. The brass and saxes are in the room. They can't hear her at all, but they can hear the drums. I'm conducting, watching her in the booth. First take, 4 minutes later, record's finished.
That's just incredible.
What you hear is exactly what was recorded. No overdubs, no going in. Her vocal was live. The band's live. It's a live record. And you can hear it. You can hear the excitement. And
it's got huge energy.
Yeah, this record is live. There's no way that it's not. And of course, the Spike Jonze film was the icing on the cake and it became a huge hit all over the world. But it literally took 4 minutes. Literally 4 minutes.
And a lot of stress.
A lot of sweat and stress, yeah.
That's a great story. Had to ask you that one. Okay, let's move on to films. And you've composed over 50 movies, and I've listened to a fair few of them now, and you definitely don't have a John Altman sound. You're so versatile, and I wonder, do you think that's part of your strength, is that whatever a film needs, whatever an artist wants, you can do it?
Well, I sort of try and subvert myself to the project in a way. But also I can't remember who it exactly was, but somebody said to me, I saw this film and I knew you'd scored it. And I said, oh, you must have seen my name. And they said, no, I heard the music and thought, that's you. I've never thought that I had a specific quality because I always tried to sort of subsume myself into the project. I think it might have been, it was something like The Roman Spring and Mrs. Stone or one of those. But they said there's a sort of romanticism and melancholy, not sadness, but sort of a yearning. And I hear it in your music. And I thought, oh, great. I don't, but I'm glad you do.
Before we talk about some of these film scores that you've done, how did you help propel Pierce Brosnan to stardom?
I was doing a film with John Mackenzie, who directed Long Good Friday. Great director. And it was really my first full scoring assignment. So I was very, very nervous. And we were mixing the music. And we were mixing a big sequence where 17-year-old Keanu Reeves murders Charles Bronson. So it was an 8-minute build-up, very intense. And I'm sort of at the desk. And John Mackenzie is behind me and he's shaking his head and going...
Oh, that's awful. I hate that noise.
And I'm sitting there thinking, he hates the music. What am I going to do? So eventually I turned to him and said, can you tell me what the problem is with the music? And he said, the music is lovely. I love the music. I said, what's eating you? And he said, well, I'm casting my next film and there's an actor I used in A Long Good Friday and he's brilliant. And I want him to play the villain, but he's in a terrible TV show, like a spoof detective show. And the audience will just burst out laughing when they see him. I've got another actor who hasn't got any baggage, but he's not as good. And I have to decide now. I can't leave it any longer. And I don't know what to do. And I said, well, if you want my opinion, which you probably don't, but if he's as good as you say he is, they may laugh when he comes on, but it will work in your favor because... by the time it finishes, they'll be going, wow, that guy is amazing. Who knew? Who knew? And he said, oh, you're absolutely right. And he picked up the phone and phoned the number. And he said, cast Pierce Brosnan.
And does he know?
He knows. I told him much later. I didn't tell him when we did Goldeneye, but I told him years later. He loved it. And I told him again when I saw him a couple of years ago, and he thought it was a great story. Careers are built on that. And of course, the film was The Fourth Protocol, and he is absolutely brilliant in it. That film made him.
Having mentioned Goldeneye, how did you come to write that iconic tank sequence?
Well, you have to go back a bit. I did a couple of films in France as an arranger for Luc Besson, the director, which were Atlantis and Leon. Great film, and Eric Serra wrote the score. And they were rebranding Bond with Pierce Brosnan, and they decided they wanted what they heard in Leon to be the score of Goldeneye. So they hired Eric, and I came on board as his arranger. And from the earliest days, it was apparent that they didn't actually want what Eric did because he was very modern, nothing related to traditional James Bond. And they suddenly thought, do you know what? We've gone new James Bond. We haven't done a Bond film for 7-8 years. We've got to have Bond music somewhere. And when it came to the tank chase, they just went, this is a big sequence, it's got to have James Bond. So they called me to go to Pinewood, and I knew it would be the tank chase. And they said, can you write it? And I said, well, I can. I know what you want, but I'm not going to do it unless Eric says it's okay, because he hired me. So they phoned Eric. Martin Campbell rang Eric, and he said, yeah, he can do it. So I was off. So I saw it on Friday, wrote it, composed it on Saturday, arranged it on Sunday. It was copied on Monday, recorded it Tuesday. It was dubbed on Wednesday, and the film came out at the end of the week.
Oh my goodness, it was right up to the wire.
Up to the wire and a bit, yes.
Gosh.
Amazing, really, isn't it?
So interesting. So do you, as a composer, arranger, do you get the finished film and then you work out the music?
In that case, yes. But quite a few films like Hear My Song and Little Voice and Shall We Dance, I was writing before they filmed because they had to dance to it or sing to it, or I had to teach Jane Horrocks and Michael Caine to perform, to sing and sing with the band rather than just on their own, which Jane had only ever sung on her own, not even with a piano player. So I had to coach her in acting terms because she didn't get musical terminology. So I would go, forget your troubles, come on, get happy. And oh, yeah, forget your troubles, come on. And that's how we pieced it together. And it worked because she got all those nominations, so we did something right.
Oh my gosh, it's such a great film and it's such a great cast. We've got her, you have Michael Caine, Brenda Blethyn, you've got Ewan McGregor, Jim Broadbent. So you write all the music then that they're performing in beforehand.
Yes.
And then the other
all the
stuff
score
comes
afterwards. Yeah.
Okay. And did you teach Michael Caine to sing as well?
Oh, yeah.
And was he a good pupil?
Oh, no, he said, I can't sing. I can't sing and I never will be able to. I've known Michael for years and years and years. I mean, I used to play at his birthday parties, so that's how far we go. Well, I played at his 50th and he's now 89. So, we go back a long way. And then I played at the Albert Hall with Joss Stone and with Quincy Jones and the LSO. And I did a lot of the arrangements for that gala concert, so I'm very fond of Michael. He's great fun.
Leon is one of my favorite all-time films, and I think that music in it is perfection. Did you arrange all of that?
I arranged all of it and I conducted all of it. And I slept through the premiere. I should explain. I flew to LA for the premiere on the day of the premiere, and I picked up tickets from Luc Besson, went to the cinema, and it was plush seats. I sat down, the opening title started, out. And I woke up during the end song. And if Leon isn't the noisiest movie ever made, I don't know what is.
You must have been really tired.
I slept through the whole thing. And I woke up in time for the party, which was good.
You start off, Hear My Song, which you mentioned earlier. Fantastic film, nominated Best Original Screenplay, and you win the Anthony Asquith Award for Best Score of the Year. You then arrange and conduct the music for Sheltering Sky. And then I have to ask you about Titanic. I'm sure everyone asks you about Titanic.
Film, yes.
That little film that you arranged and produced the music of the band playing. Is it?
Yeah.
And so how did you make that so authentic?
From my childhood, I had this interest in whenever I heard a record, I had to know when it was recorded and who recorded it and why and how. And I became very aware that, if somebody said 1920s music, I would say, do you want 1921 or 1929? And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, there's a big difference. And when they hired me to do the music on the ship, I projected my brain into 1912, plus a ship's orchestra who wouldn't be the absolute best musicians in the world, because they would then be concert soloists or in symphony orchestras. They wouldn't be on a liner. So there was that double-edged thing of, I'm going to write the arrangements, but they have to be not absolutely brilliant, particularly ragtime things. It was a year old, Alexander's Ragtime Band. So the band would not be playing a 1960s jazz arrangement of it. They'd be playing an authentic 1912 Umpa. And that's what I wrote. So that's why the music sounds so authentic.
And wasn't there an interesting moment where they woke you up in the middle of the night?
Well, the most famous scene in the film that everyone knows is when the ship sinks and the band plays on deck. People love it. How that came about was James Cameron decided he wanted to film it live with the orchestra playing live. And they said, we don't know it and we haven't got any music. We don't know what to do. Because I was the historical music advisor, I was actually in London and they're in Mexico and I was asleep. So I woke up and there were 10 messages on my answer machine. So I played them and they got increasingly frenetic. And the last one was James Cameron phoned me immediately. So I got on the phone. I said, oh, James, it's John Altman. He goes, nearer my God to thee. How's it go? I went, nearer. He said, hold on. Again. I went, nearer. And he'd put a megaphone to the phone. And there was a guy, one of the orchestra, sitting there with a bit of manuscript paper, scribbling it down as I sang it. And it's the most famous scene in the film. That's how it happened. If I'd have sung something else, but I couldn't work out in the whole of the world, why I'm the only person who might know how that song went. And they had to wait all night. They're probably all floating about in the water.
It's cold.
Freezing cold, waiting for me to answer the phone. But that's how that scene was done. Amazing, really.
No, it's brilliant. You also do Hope Springs. How much time do you have to write that score?
I wrote basically the whole score in one day. You know these test screenings they have all the time now, which are the bane of everyone's life, but you have to do them. So they had a test screening and a focus group. And after the test screening, the editor had put in some AOR, which nobody in this country knows what on earth that is, but it's adult orientated rock. It's easy listening rock. So he'd put it through the film. And they had the focus group afterwards, and we're sitting behind the screen, so they can't see us. And one of the people there says, I didn't like the music. And I thought, oh, God, here comes the alarm bells. And this is Friday night. So I thought, something's going to happen. They don't like the music, rethink. So I got a phone call on the Monday morning from the producer, and it wasn't quite what I thought. He said, look, the focus group could not get that there was a love story between Colin Firth and Heather Graham. Could you write some music that points that up through the film? And I said, this is quite awkward, but, I'm supposed to be on the film for 6 weeks getting ideas together. I've seen it once, and you're asking me to record something on Wednesday. I don't want it judged. They said, no, it won't be judged. Whatever you do, we're just going to put it in those places. That's the end of it. And then we'll take it out and we'll do a score. Okay, fine. So I sat down and I wrote something, and I thought, well, it's set in sort of the mid-Connecticut somewhere. And so I'm going to write something sort of vaguely countryish with a harmonica, and I did, and got the band together. Went into the studio on the Wednesday, recorded the first cue, and I sort of turned around, and the control room, there's the director, the producers, and the engineers, and they're all clapping. I can't hear it. It's soundproof, but I can see everybody going like this. So I went in the control room, and everyone went, brilliant, well done. It's perfect. Recorded the 11 or 12 cues. That became the score of the film. And all I had to do was add some, 2 or 3 cues for Minnie Driver's character. And I've done 4 films. I saw Minnie last week at the book festival.
And obviously, the first time you met her, you were on a train or something together, weren't you? And
yeah, it was the first film. I say she was 17, but I think she might have been 18 or 19. But she was like 3rd or 4th build. And we travelled up to Harrogate together, and we had breakfast in the hotel together. When we got to Harrogate, we couldn't find our driver. And he was literally in the car park looking for a Mini Driver. And he said, there are no minis here, I don't know which one she's in. So that was the start.
Well, he won't be thinking that now, knowing who she is. Okay, the last film we're going to just chat about is you win an Emmy for Outstanding Music Composition for RKO 281, and it's the film about the problems making Citizen Kane. And I've watched some of it now because I actually hadn't heard of this film, and it's a fantastic film. And that beginning music, which we have the violins and then the piano and the harp, and it's so haunting. And I thought, gosh, that's completely different again from all the other stuff I've heard you do, but it's absolutely stunning piece of music.
Thank you. Well, the funny thing about that is Ben Ross, the director, Ridley Scott, who was producing it, and HBO, who were the studio, all disagreed about what the music should be. So one would tell me, oh, we want film noir. Oh, no, we don't want film noir. We want this. Oh, no, we don't want this. We want that. Oh, no, we don't want that. And we're getting close to recording. So I kidnapped Ben Ross and got him round to my house and said, you're not leaving here until we've decided what the music's going to be. And he's very musical. So I said, give me some examples of things that you really like. And he said, well, there's this and there's that and there's this and that. And as he was telling me, I realized that every piece he was talking about was in 3/4 time. And I said to him, it's funny, I've written a little cue for a moment in the film that's in 3/4. It's a sort of waltz. It's sort of a cod waltz. It's like a music box type waltz. And he said, oh, let's hear it. And I played it for him. He said, that's it. That's what we want. So that became the score of the film. Just like that. It's amazing.
Well, on top of all of this, you've done your 4,000 commercials. Television, you do all the Peake Practice that entire
10 years of it. Yeah.
Wow. Moving on to live performances, you have the John Altman Big Band, jazz quartet, and you're putting bands together all the time. There was one all-star band in 1981 for Amnesty International benefit show, and I was wondering if you could talk us through the members of that band.
Well, it was quite a large band. We had a guy called Sting. I don't quite know what happened to him. He was playing guitar and singing. I had several guitarists backing him up, including a guy called Eric Clapton and a bloke called Jeff Beck. There was Phil Collins, whoever he might be, playing tambourine. Bob Geldof and Midge Ure on backing vocals. Donovan, Sheena Easton, Chaz Jankel, who I mentioned, on keyboards, and me on keyboards. Mark Isham, who's one of the top film composers, playing trumpet. My cousin Simon Phillips on drums. Mo Foster, Neil Murray from Whitesnake, Ray Russell, Neil Innes. Oh, that's a band.
That really is a band. How do they all get on?
Fantastically. And Eric said to me, "You're the band leader. What do you want us to do?" So I was in charge. Whatever happened, they all took their orders from me.
And they all listened.
And they all listened, and we had a great time. We did 5 nights, I think, at Theatre Royal Drury Lane. It was filmed. It's on YouTube. It's quite something. And it's fun to do. But I love playing, and I'm still, as you said, I've got the big band. I'm also, because I played with Prince, which is another story. Whenever the New Power Generation come to do their tribute to London, I guest on Nothing Compares to You. So I'm doing that in a couple of weeks at the Coco. And usually it's either Beverly Knight or Misha Paris or Mackenzie, great singer. And it feels like Prince is still there, because it's basically the sound that was behind him. So I love that. And I still, I play as much as I can, keep that strand going. And I kept it going all through,
And you're also co-founder and co-host for the 10 Room, and that won Club Night of the Year, and that was every Monday night. You hosted some huge names there. And what was sort of the purpose behind that?
It literally was to get me back. And when I'd started playing as a young player, I would go and sit in, as I said, with established bands. And that sort of folded and faded away. So I thought, now we're the established players, we should start something where young players and others can come and jam. And it took off. So, as you say, Lionel Richie, Shaka Khan, The Roots, Wycliffe, Blue Cantrell, Macy Gray, Angie Stone, Jill Scott, they're all coming and performing for free. Chris Tucker, Will Smith, dare I mention, all came and performed for nothing. Amazing. Alicia Keys, incredible. And then in the audience would be young Amy Winehouse, young Joss Stone, young Katie Melua, and everybody like Idris Elba, all the people who've become big actors now, and sports people and directors would come as well. So Brad Pitt would come in, Leonardo DiCaprio, Christina Aguilera, Justin Timberlake, all Madonna's crew, all Stevie Wonder's band, all George Benson's band. It was the first port of call, 10 Room on a Monday night, we'll be there. And it was wonderful because you never really quite knew who was going to show up. You would be told. When we moved to the Pigalle, Prince came 4 weeks in a row.
To perform or to watch?
Just to hang out. And we discovered Jessie J there. And
that's where Jessie J started.
Yeah, that's where she started. And our backing singer was Cynthia Erivo, who's now an Oscar nominee,
Oh my gosh, yes.
So yeah, it's an amazing period of my life, really, from 99 through to the mid-2010s, every week.
Amy Winehouse, what were your recollections of her?
Very fond recollections of her. As I say, I sort of mentored her in the sense that she looked up to me. I was way older, everybody there was 20, 22, whatever. She was 16, 17. I was 50 years old when it started. So she called me sir. And we would sit on the stairs maybe, and I'd say, oh, you should listen to this one, or I'd give her a cassette of a singer she didn't know. And she would get up and sing, and it would just be her and me in the rhythm section, and we'd do a standard, And then she performed with us sporadically all the way through her years. she took the whole band from the 10 room to be her band, and they stayed her band.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Very loyal. And then she used to do things like, all the paparazzi outside her flat. She would make them tea and biscuits and take it out, and sandwiches, and take it out to them. And she was wonderful, So I was, more than heartbroken, when she went. And I'm still in touch with family and her band and everyone. But she left a huge hole. She really did. And she was wonderful. I think the last gig we did together was the Berkeley Square Ball, where I didn't recognize her. I walked past her because she was so thin. And I heard this voice go, "Aren't you going to say hello?" And I turned around and it was her. I couldn't believe it. And she said to me, "I didn't want any of this. I wanted to make music with my friends."
Oh, so sad.
And I said, "Well, we're your friends and you're making music. What's the problem?" But it was
too late then.
Too late. But then she sort of rallied and got better and got off. And like so many people, I guess she started doing something like drinking vodka, or, others would take drugs, and they'd think they had the tolerance level that they had before they stopped. And of course they didn't. So a lesser amount finished them off before they realized that they were actually, or they'd take the same amount that they'd taken before. And that would be the end of them. It happened to Paul Kossoff, it happened to Sid Vicious, it happened to Ollie, it happened to, it happened to Amy with the drink. She just drank more than she should have done. And it's terrible. I was with Benedict Cumberbatch when I got the text saying she's gone. Awful.
Oh, so tragic. I'm going to ask you 10 rapid fire questions. Is that
okay.
All right? Okay, here we go. Because I'm going to speed up now. Fit of giggles on the stage. Have you ever had them?
Yes, a few times. With Hot Chocolate, Errol and our trumpet player got drunk before the gig. We were on stage playing the intro to Sexy Thing. And Errol was suddenly in the trumpet section. Our trumpet player was out front singing I Believe in Miracles. That finished me off. Also, we had a big band gig, and the keyboard player had brought a synthesizer. He didn't quite know his way around it. So he wanted to have a Hammond organ sound for his solo. And the whole band sort of went, and he went in. But he got the flexitone, which is the noise when Bugs Bunny gets hit by a 10-ton weight on his head or falls down the stairs.
Yeah.
So it sort of went boingy, 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 boingy. And we were done.
Excellent. Okay, what about most embarrassing moment?
Okay, the most embarrassing moment, I did a gig at, it was either London School of Economics or what's now Westminster University. Can't remember which. We drew up in the car, my guitarist brought me, and I said to him, I don't feel right. As he pulled up outside, I'm afraid, so did I. And because I was in my stage gear, just covered, but I wasn't wearing my coat, which was in the back. So I got inside, I took off everything.
Did you feel better, at least?
I felt perfectly fine. I put on my coat. I went on stage in a coat. That was it. And I sat at the back at the piano for the whole set. Profoundly embarrassed. The other one, which I should tell quickly, was in the days when you got flights through Virgin, they would send a car. And this particular day, an hour and a half after we left, it went past my house again. All the roads were closed. So I told him, drop me at a station and I'll leg it, which I did. Got to Heathrow and it was before 9/11, so I could get on the plane quickly. And they took my bags and got on the plane. Sat down. The cabin crew brought me a drink. I went like that and I poured the whole lot all over myself.
Oh,
obviously nerves. Yeah. The plane hasn't taken off and I'm soaked from head to foot. So she came back and said, well, don't worry. We'll take your shirt and trousers, put them in. Well, I think I kept my shirt. I must have kept my shirt. We'll take your trousers, put them in the cockpit and they'll dry. Okay, fine. So I'm sitting and we'll give you a blanket. So they gave me a Virgin tartan blanket. So I'm sitting there and the seatbelt sign goes off and I realise I haven't been to the bathroom since 7:00 in the morning and it's now almost midday. So I charge up to the front thinking the good thing is nobody knows me on this plane. Go to the bathroom, come out, Seat 1, Billy Connolly, who I've worked with, I did a film with, and The Secret of Lucian's Ball. And he goes, "Oh, John, what clan are you then?" And he does a whole routine, and I'm just standing there sheepishly. I can't go back, So I stand there while he does this whole routine about my tartan blanket. Go back to my seat, and my trousers are on the seat dry.
Oh.
So that's my embarrassing moment.
Gosh, those are brilliant ones. All the traveling and you've done, all the people that you know. Best bar. What's your favourite bar?
The Whiskey Bar at the Sunset Marquee in the 90s, because everybody went there and a lot of them weren't well known at the time. So I would be with Billy Bob Thornton. I was the first person to know he'd married Angelina Jolie because they told me and said, "Don't tell anyone."
Oh, wow.
I was standing in the middle.
Tell?
Who am I going to tell? Johnny Depp, who I introduced to Drew Barrymore, George Clooney, we used to go for dinner, Vince Vaughn, Rick James when he was not drinking anymore, Kevin Spacey. I mean, this is a bar, that was wonderful. Great evenings, especially with Billy Bob, who's a hoot.
Yeah. Okay. Greatest regret?
Not having actually performed with Stevie Wonder, who I know pretty well, and his band I've played with hundreds of times, but I've never got to do anything with him, and I'd love to have done something with him. That's a big regret. Okay, next one. In the business of live shows, and that well-known phrase, the show must go on. Well, you've actually almost done that with your wearing your coat. The show did go on. Was there a moment when everything went wrong? Oh, I'm sure I have. Whispering Wheels, Wolverhampton, with Susan Cadogan, reggae, Jamaican Independence Night. I don't think they liked us. And Chaz Jankel was in the band. I think a bottle hit our guitarist before we'd even plugged in.
Oh my goodness.
But Pete Waterman was looking after us, pre-Stock Aitken and Waterman. And he's going, "It's all right, lads, we've got the money, next service station, see you there."
Oh no.
We got out after one song. Oh, yeah, that was the worst, definitely.
That's horrible. People can be so nasty. Okay, most proud moment?
Winning the awards, I think, getting an honorary doctorate and Lifetime Achievement Awards. That's great. Yeah, I mean, people saying to me, your music inspired me, or, you were my biggest inspiration, stuff like that. You can't beat it.
Lots of them, no. All-time favourite star to work with?
That's tricky because I enjoyed all of them equally. I mean, I loved playing because it was iconic, playing with Muddy Waters. The thing about Nick Drake and Bob Marley, I think, is they weren't superstars when I got them, so by the time they became superstars, it wasn't anything to do with me. But the feeling of being on stage with Muddy Waters playing Got My Mojo Working, is like, this is heaven.
How do you do it? When you have a clean sheet of paper and you have been told, here's the film, or here's a song, or here's the artist, do you have a method? Do you start with a melody? Do you start with a drum beat?
Well, what I always say to people is writing music can be like painting a painting. And you do not always start the painting in the middle. You can go to the bottom right-hand corner, the top left-hand corner, the top right-hand corner. So if I'm stuck, and there's a process which I won't really go into, where you spend days not actually doing anything, but just walking around and thinking about the film. And then suddenly you can go to the piano and there it is. But if I can't get to that stage, as you say, there might be a rhythmic figure or a counter melody or a string figure or some ostinato or a brass idea. And you start there and then you take it from there. So there's always an answer waiting for you. It just might not be in the middle of the page. And that's my modus operandi. It seems to work. I mean, I'm sure one day it won't. But
so far it's serving you well. Okay, final question. What is it about cricket that you love?
Everything. I don't know. Somebody said it's like mobile chess, which I think is a good definition. It's tactics. It's sizing up what's going on. It's not just punting a ball around. It's where you put it. It's how you bowl it. Everybody on the field has a skill that they're trying to apply to what's going on. I mean, I enjoy watching soccer, but it's like, I'll kick the ball up there and I'll kick the ball over here and I'll get it in the goal, and 90 minutes and it's done. Test cricket, like the match that finished yesterday, it ebbs, it flows, it's unpredictable, and it's tactics and it's deep thought. I don't think it's a coincidence that music and cricket, particularly in this country, obviously in this country, have gone so hand in hand, and I played for years with Eric Clapton and Bill Wyman and Phil Collins and all that lot. It's not a coincidence.
Well, what else is in the pipeline?
I've got the big band gig with Misha Paris at the end of July. I'm up for a film which I may get, I may not get. I'm completely sanguine about it. And I'm doing loads of book appearances. I'm going to Liverpool on Friday. I'm at the British Library next Sunday. I'm in Kells in Ireland for the Hinterland Festival, the end of June. And then July, I'm doing Pizza Hoban with Aled Jones. And of course, Aled, who I produced when he was 14, now his daughter, Amelia, is in star of the Oscar-winning movie. It's a Coda. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realise she was in that.
That's Aled's daughter, and she's the main star. So the wheel's gone full circle.
Well, I cannot recommend your book highly enough. I've had such a lovely time reading about all that you've done. And I love the fact that you end it with watch this space. So I shall be watching this space and I'm listening as well to this space. But in the meantime, thank you so much, John. I know you've had an exhausting day and you're so lovely that you've come back and that you've taken the time to talk to me. So thank you.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to Bandwidth Conversations. Thanks to Anna B., Head of Marketing, to Matthew Passy and all at the Podcast Consultant, to Bagawire for the music, to the Money Maze Podcast. Thank you for listening. Any feedback, please email me, katie@bandwidthconversations.com. Please sign up on our website, www.bandwidthconversations.com, so we can notify you about new podcast releases. We hope to see you again soon.